for someone, looking for someone like me. Oh yeah, looking for someone, looking for someone like me. Looking for someone, looking for someone like me.
This was a challenging time period for me for documenting and confirming many topics. There's no specific book or material out there to assist with complete facts, all lined up, and with confidence. Pulling this together was fun and informative. There may be some fans out there who have their own information and thoughts on events or details. This is all about open forum and discussions also. I and others want to see comments and sharing info. So there is somewhat a timeline of this period, but pinpoint accuracy, that can be debatable. I found some times and dates just being inconsistent. So what I will say is enjoy and absorb what I pulled together from many sources, who I'm thankful for, to give us deeper insight to what you may not know. To gather some facts and information, I've listened to many of the hundreds of podcasts and YouTube presentations out there about Sticky Fingers. Some are real good, some are just there, but kudos to them to promote the Stones. And those of you new to my channel, my goal is to go down even more, deeper level, and bring you the visuals. Some of it is known, some of it will not be. Take in what you can. For anybody skeptical, if you don't like what I'm presenting, just move on. All good. But if you do enjoy something, please, this is the first time I'm asking, please give it a like or a comment. The task of pulling this together is gargantuan amount of time, personal hours of mine. With the Sticky Fingers sessions starting December 69 through the 1970 year, it would be Mick Taylor's first full album as a Stone. And for the Brian Jones fanatics, this had to be strange to witness and feel, with Brian contributing multi-layers of instruments and talents. Now with this creating a new era, it would be engulfed as a guitar band now. Sticky would premiere their new groove along with a country twist, and this album would approach flawlessness, a perfect diamond for a Stones fan. 24-year-old Jon Landau of Rolling Stone magazine, in April of '71, he would go on record with a high expectation and a closed mind saying, "Sticky Fingers, it does not really sound like they are doing what they want to do." The high point of this album are not that high. Well, Landau did go on to be an overall success in his career, but not with that comment. When I was turned on to the Stones in 1975 at 14 years old, it was the older neighborhood kids that would tell me, you have to be patient and let the Stones albums creep into you with many listens. And that's how I approached every album. And they grew and grew, and they haven't stopped.
You got the move.
Now finishing up the trilogy from Muscle Shoals, You Gotta Move. This is a divine tune from the Churches, early 1900s or earlier. No one knows who pulled this one together, but it was just passed down, describing that it's God who determines one's ultimate gospel fate. This was sang by many different versions and words. There was a recording in the 40s by the Willie Four and several others through the 40s.
You got to move, yes, you got to move, load the window down.
The original Blind Boys of Alabama sang this.
You got to move, you got to move.
This one is from Reverend Gary Davis with a slight gospel bluesy flavor and different lyrics.
Brother, when God get ready, you got to move.
Sam Cooke had an early version recording in the 50s, then again in 64 with a soulful feel.
You got to move. I said you gotta move.
What is a really fun fact, when Sam was touring at this time, it was Billy Preston, 16-year-old Billy, assisting him on piano and organ. And then you keep in mind that 1975-76 Stones tour, Billy was playing it again. Fred McDowell was born in 1904, Rossville. Playing around, 14 years oldish, self-taught. In his late teens, Fred would learn how to play slide using his pocket knife. He then would graduate to a polished rib bone and then onto the glass slide. In the late 20s, he moved to Como, Mississippi, playing at local house parties and picnics. So he was a farmer, but he was also a well-known Delta blues with a hill country sound, but he didn't have any recordings. Fred, in September of '59, would take a walk through the woods of his neighbor's house, Lonnie Young. He was carrying his guitar. It was at the Young's farm that Alan Lomax was recording them for their drum ensemble. For those of you who don't know, Alan Lomax and his father, Alan started in 1933 with his dad. Alan would spend 6 decades working to promote world folk music. He records so many of these early bluesmen and women. In '47, he had the first portable tape recorder that made hi-fi recordings when he was in Mississippi. He taped Delta church services and prisoners while they were working. His 5th time in Mississippi, in the 50s, he would compile an 18-volume LP series for Columbia. He would travel abroad and in the U.S. So here walks in Fred to the Young session with Alan there. Alan had no idea what this farmer in overalls was going to do for him. He listened. Then Lomax and Fred would go back to Fred's porch and farm and record. Fred would become one of the world's most famous bluesmen. Fred's slide style was so unique, it would sing along with his voice, making a sweet, balanced sound.
He is probably best known for his style of guitar playing, an old style which he learned from an uncle years ago. Tuning his guitar to an open chord, he sometimes uses a glass bottleneck to slide up and down the strings. With that bottleneck, he can make his guitar say anything he does.
He recorded his version of You Got to Move in 1965 using Reverend Gary Davis's lyrics, but make it his own style and sound, his interpretation. His song sections are 7 bars long, different than the typical 12-bar blues. It's played in open D, focusing on the 1 chord. It was D, G, D, A, D. In the studio, Keith is playing a 12-string in open C. And in some interviews, Taylor is mentioning that Keith was playing the National Resonator. But we do know Keith played the National Resonator when performing live in open D. And Mick Taylor in the studio was playing rhythm on a 54 Telly, and then he switches to slide.
We're down in Alabama, we're down in Muscle Shoals. We've got to cut some Fred McDowell stuff. If ever I'm going to do it, it's got to be here, you know. And probably...
So the first night, they cut You Got to Move, which they'd been doing in the live show as a duet with just acoustic guitar and Jagger. So they're doing it with the whole band. And Stanley and I are in the control room with Jimmy Johnson. They're starting to run this thing down, and it ain't working. I mean, it was terrible. Wyman wasn't playing bass, he was playing Wurlitzer piano, and it just wasn't working. And I thought, wow, this is really going to be a drag. I'm going to sit here and watch the Stones blow it, you know. Stanley had just become romantically involved with this younger sister of a high school friend of his, who was really kind of sleazy. But he wants to go to the motel, to call this chick on the phone. And they had just had another one of the studios in Muscle Shoals. They just had a drug raid, the sheriffs. And one of the things that Johnson was afraid of was that somebody from this other studio would find out that the Stones were at Muscle Shoals Sounds and, you know, call the cops to reciprocate. So they were real paranoid about drugs at the studio. So I figured this would be a good opportunity. If we go with Stanley, he could talk to his girlfriend, I could smoke a joint. So we're gone maybe 45 minutes, an hour tops. And what we left was chaos, you know, for the Stones. We come back and they're listening to the first playback and they've got it. And they had like managed to turn this chaos into what was literally a classic Stones performance, you know, in a matter of 45 minutes. We walk in, Charlie Watts got this big grin on his face, you know. I thought, wow, maybe they're not going to blow it.
You got to move, you got to move, you got to move, child, you got to move. When the law gets ready, you got to move.
Fred's song was 3 minutes and 21 seconds. Stones, 2 minutes and 33 seconds. When I heard the Stones version's lyrics, I would think there were more words to it than what we see here. Simple and brilliant. We're listening to the haunting, slow bass drum of Charlie with some snapping of the hi-hat. This gives a ghostly pain in the song. Here we know about the dueling of the guitars with Keith and Taylor. Love this part, this little slide that Keith does. You gotta be moved by all of this in unison. Vocally chilling. The chorus is even more goosebumps.
You got to move, child. You got to move. When the Lord get ready, you got to move. You may be high, You may be low, you may be rich, child, you may be poor. But when the Lord get ready, you got to move.
Here's Jeremy Barres showing us the action and how it's played. Top is Keith and the bottom is Taylor. When we hear the completed version and all the ingredients thrown in the pot, it's perfection. Bill is playing an electric piano. Towards the end, there's no bass. They would play You Gotta Move 22 times live during the '69 tour, not counting rehearsals or sound checks. They did rehearse it when in LA for the tour. It was a standout on the tour, as it would be just Mick and Keith on stage. So going into Muscle shows, they were prepared, or they should have been prepared, as they could not get it together at first, as Jim mentions. Now supposedly Fred knew of the Stones covering his version and was happy they did, and to expose his music. Fred would pass July 72 of cancer at 66 years old. The Sticky Fingers' first original pressing would not have Fred on the credits. Reverend Gary Davis's manager, Manny Greenhill, he fought for this song to be recredited to Fred and Davis, and it was. Wild Horses, Part 3 of the Muscle Shoals Trilogy. Mick on vocals and percussion. Keith, electric guitar, acoustic, 12-string, open G, and backing vocals. Mick Taylor electric, and acoustic with a Nashville tuning. Bill on bass, Charlie drums, and Jim Dickinson on piano, tack piano. This one was done in Muscle Shoals, as I mentioned, in Olympic, in December and February, and there's talks about Trident Studios also for this one. Engineers are Glenn and Andy Johns, Jimmy Johnson, and both Chris Kimsey and Keith Hardwood are assistants. Produced by Jimmy Miller. I'm not talking much about Jimmy during this time frame, but he picks up where he left off and applies his expertise. If you need more insight on Jimmy and getting started, watch my Beggar's Banquet document. It's all explained there.
But the third night, of course, was to be literally the major beginning of my career. Was Wild Horses. Now, Wild Horses, Keith had a little more of the song. He had the whole chorus, and he had some kind of mumbling words. It was a lullaby, as he initially wrote it, to Marlon, his son, his first son had just been born. He didn't want to go on the road. That's what the song was about. And Jagger rewrote it. It took a little longer than he did with Brown Sugar, but the same kind of thing. It was just amazing to watch his mind, in his hand, write it as fast as he could. And he changed the song. It's about Marion Faithfull and whatever. I don't want to get into that, but as they start running the song down, the way they actually worked was Jagger would stand on the floor with a handheld microphone. Of course, everybody's wearing earphones, and run the song down to the band until the band got the chord progression and the arrangement. Then he'd go into the control room with Jimmy Johnson and work on the individual instrument sounds. Very businesslike. And the band would play the song instrumentally, which was a big help, to putting the parts together in the song. So as they start the song's in G, starts on a B minor. Start running the song down. Ian Stewart gets up from the piano and starts rolling up chords and packing up equipment like they're getting ready to leave. And I'm standing there with Wexler, who has by now showed up. He shows up for the third day of the session. And Jagger comes over to where we're standing. He says, "Oh, well, I assume now we need a keyboardist." And Wexler inappropriately says, "Baby, we could call Barry Beckett." I said, "Jerry, I don't think that's what he means." So I start trying to play, Well, first I get the chords from Keith. And then I start, and he's drastically out of tune. So I sit down at the concert grand piano, and I played a couple of chords, and I realized this is never going to work. And you can't go, "Hey, Keith, baby, E, this is E, let's tune it up, pal." That's not going to work. So I thought, well, maybe the Wurlitzer. Sometime you can kind of cheat the Wurlitzer and get in the cracks, No, the Wurlitzer's not going to work. In the back of the studio, there was this old tack piano, upright piano with dead, rusted, and coated strings and tacks in the felts, for the ricky-ticky pizza parlor sound. Nobody ever used it. They got stuff stacked up on it. The Stones had got their dope stashed in the piano. And Tony the Bagman is laying back there asleep on a couch right by this tack piano. So I thought, well, I bet nobody has tuned that piano in 10 years, and this is my only chance, the only thing left in the studio that might be in tune with Keith Richards. So I go back to the tack piano and I start plinking around, and Tony wakes up and moves the dope, which was a nice little vignette, moment in the whole thing, the whole story. But I find an octave and a half of this piano that's out of tune enough to fit with Keith Richards. And it's really simple because the dead strings, there's no harmonics, there's no overtones. It's easier to work. So I'm back there plinking away on this chord chart that Keith is giving me, and I start to realize it's wrong. And again, I can't point this out. It's not going to work. So as I'm struggling with it, Wyman comes back over to me. And he said, "Where'd you get them chords, mate?" And I said, "I got them from Keith." He said, "Oh, pay no attention to him. He has no idea what he's doing." And then he said, what's to me has become an immortal line. I've quoted it over and over. He says, "He only knows where he put his fingers yesterday," which is a perfect definition of rock and roll guitar playing, So we work out Keith had just learned, or thought he had learned, to make a Nashville chord chart, which is in numbers, rather than symbols. And what he had done was, his song's in G, but it begins on B minor, and he'd call B minor 1. So the whole chart was up a minor third, which is harmonically kind of interesting, but not what you'd call right, So Wyman and I worked out the chord chart, and so I start playing it, Little Mick Taylor, was like 19 and hadn't said a word in 3 days, He's picked up a Nashville high-strung guitar with like all high strings, and he's plinking away over there. He can't figure it out either. So he comes over, grabs my chord chart, and walks off with it. I thought, well, okay. And I just started plinking away, They still think, the Stones to this day think I'm a country piano player. I knew 2 country licks, 2 Floyd Cramer licks I learned in school in Texas. And I had basically learned them because I thought they were funny. And I had some little stuff that I did on country sessions for Stan Kessler, but it wasn't like really playing, you know. But that's what they wanted. So I'm back there, I'm hitting my little Floyd Cramer lick, you know. And Mick goes in the control room to set the, you know, the tones, like I said. And after about 30 or 45 minutes, and we're struggling with the song. I mean, they are barely playing the song. And Charlie Watts would stop for long periods of time, and you can hear it in the master, and then come back in weird moments. And it was a struggle. And so, Mick's in the control room. I hear the click of the talkback in the earphones, and he says, "Hey, Keith, what do you think about the piano?" And I think, okay, here it comes. You know, this is it. Send the hillbilly home, you know. And Keith, God bless him, he says, "It's the only thing I like." I said, all right. So I played my other Floyd Cramer lick, which turned into what they called the solo. Believe me, I was not trying to play a solo. I was trying to get to the next thinking chord because I knew nobody else knew what it was.
Keith had this tune, Wild Horses, but I don't think that was really finished. He had a chorus, but that was about it. So that was all written on the spot.
It was just an idea, and it had to go to the bathroom for a little while just to sort of figure it out. And then say, okay, I'm ready, back in, and then take, you know.
Marcel Show's studio was in this rather interesting place. Being there does inspire you to do it slightly differently. Wild Horses is a sort of country song. And I remember we used Jim Dickinson. He played tack piano.
The Mazo brothers had showed up, documentary filmmakers, the third night to start this. Well, they'd already shot the Stones in New York. They were going to follow the Stones to Altamont, which was the next day. They left Muscle Shoals and flew to Altamont. I have never been sorry I didn't make the trip. But so the Mazels, and they were like, they shot around with available light, you know, but I knew that stuff wasn't going to stick. They set up lights for 2 shots, and those 2 shots are in the movie. Give Me Shelter. One is Mick and Jimmy Johnson sitting behind the console listening to Brown Sugar. And the other is me and Keith sitting on the couch in front of the console listening to Wild Horses. After they get the vocals, and they're doing rough mixes, and it's it's dawn by now, the third night. Things are pretty relaxed, you know. And I see the Mazels setting up these lights for this shot, you know. And I went to drama school. I know what the lights are about, you know. So I thought, well, this couch is just aimed right at the couch, you know. And as luck would have it, I had the last joint. So I put it behind my ear, and I sat down on the couch. And before you know it, here comes Keith, you know. And he sits down beside me on the couch, and they play back Wild Horses, and they turn on the lights, and I'm in the movie. It was 1.5 years, 2 years later before I saw the final cut and realized that I hadn't made it, but I did. I look like I'm there to change the tire, but I am nonetheless in the movie, you know. And it did absolutely jumpstart my career, so what laughingly referred to as my career. But I had no idea for like 10 years or more why Ian Stewart had not played the song, you know, which really, that was the secret, you know, that was where I made the move. And I was in New York having a meeting with Keith, actually. The way you have a meeting with Keith, if you go and you check into a hotel and you wait days, you know, and then always in the middle of the night the phone rings and somebody comes and gets you and takes you to some other undisclosed location and you meet with Keith. So I was in New York trying to meet with Keith about the as yet unproduced Robert Johnson movie, Love in Vain, which I was going to do the music and he was going to get the credit, basically. And I'm waiting, Plaza Hotel. I'm in the bar of the Plaza Hotel with Ian Stewart. And I said, man, by no means is this, am I complaining in any way? Because my miserable career is based on that song. But why didn't you play Wild Horses? He said, minor chords, mate. I said, I don't play minor chords. I am a boogie-woogie piano player, he says, and I do not play minor chords. When I'm performing on stage with the lads, he calls them, and a minor chord occurs, I lifts me hands in protest. So that's the whole reason for my career is he didn't want to play that B minor. God bless him.
There's plenty of drama and details about this tune. A lot of information. But I'm going to first start off going back to July of '69. Now, despite Mick saying in 1995 the song is not about Marianne, in Marianne's book, which was a great resource, Mick was filming Ned Kelly, and a troubled Marianne was down in Australia with him. She fell into a coma after a botched suicide attempt, overdosing on barbiturates in her hotel room. She was in a coma for 120 hours and hospitalized. Mick, realizing he got serious issues with her, he would step into his sentimental and romantic mode. After she awakens, he mentions to her that he has something he wants her to hear. He knew that she knew about his Marsha Hunt romance. Mick walks to the stereo in the room and he puts on a tape. He takes her hand while kneeling in front of her and looked her into the eyes while she hears the following. Graceless lady, you know who I am. You know I can't let you slide through my hand. She hugged him and she cried, but she knows that those lyrics cannot mend their problems. So we hear a lot about attack piano. I can't just accept hearing that term without knowing what it is. It's a piano that has thumbtacks, or small nails that are inserted into the piano's felt hammers, or in the cloth between the felt and strings. It was popular in the early days in Western, ragtime, or even vaudeville bars and saloons. It gave a truly unique sound that was brighter, a tinny sound, instead of the felt hitting the string. Keith's tune and riffs and chords and the key lyric line, but with some of Mick's verses also added, which is what one of their best masterful twin collaborations would be. It just flows together.
Childhood living is easy to do. The things you wanted, I bought them for you. Drag me away. Wild, wild horses, we'll ride them someday.
Mick adding some lyrics from Marianne and quickly adding new ones. They would do several takes. Now, on the last day at Muscle Shoals, both Amit and Jerry Wexler would arrive to the studio. After all the vocal overdubs were completed, everyone would go back to the Holiday Inn for a farewell breakfast. It was here that the actual Atlantic and Rolling Stones deal was negotiated and confirmed. At breakfast, Jim Dickinson and Bill were sitting in a booth waiting to be served, and the waitress would ask if they were in the band. And Bill would politely say yes, and the waitress just disrobed and took their order. Muscle Shoals proved to be one of the most historic sessions in Stones history. From there, they would depart from the local airport and head to San Francisco and face one of the worst days in their career.
Oh, baby. Oh. You feeling all right? Oh, it feels pretty good up here now. It's a bit warmed up a bit. Now it's warmed up a bit. We're gonna do something. You wanna hear a sad, sad song? This is a sad, sad song. Child of living is easy to do. The things you wanted, I bought them for you.
Wild Horse is probably one of the best collaborations between Mick and me. We were doing overdubs in Mick's house in the country. And for some reason, I remember leaving the studio and then I had to drive like 200 miles or something. I was just cruising all the way, but I remember leaving that session. I was still like, wow.
Now here comes a twisty part. What you're viewing right now is from a YouTube channel showing a purchased journal that was owned and written by Graham Parsons. Here it is, written lyrics and chords to Wild Horses. No dates shown. Mick wanted Graham to add to the master some pedal steel using Sneaky Pete Kleinow. He was a member of the Flying Burrito Brothers, where Graham was lead singer. Now what I'm going to play for you now is taken from March 1973. I'm going to let Graham explain and talk about the Wild Horses saga, the background, and the Flying Burritos version. Keep in mind, the Stones and Graham were still shaking from Altamont.
So the first time I heard it was the night after Altamont. We were all, just shaking from the whole experience, and they were leaving the next day, or at least Mick was, to take his suitcase of money to Switzerland. And he said, I want you to hear this song, man, because I think it's something that you might be interested in. And he played me Wild Horses and Brown Sugar. And I really dug it. They recorded them in Muscle Shoals about a week, two before. And I dug it. And it was a couple of months later, I got a call from him, and he said, if I send you the master, will you put a steel guitar on it? And I said, sure, I will. And he sent me the master, and I got Denny Cordell to produce it, and we went into the record plant, and I got Leon Russell in there. And somebody came in with some sort of strange dust, and things just went haywire. The engineer forgot where he was, and things like that, and so they didn't use that track. And I asked Mick if we could put it on our next album if we didn't release it as a single, and he thought about it and said all right. And then they didn't release it, I think, for almost a year after that. I don't know why. It's a beautiful song.
So the pedal steel was put down, but the Stones didn't go for it.
Stage lines could make me feel bitter.
Burrito Brothers would make their own version. There was so much speculation at the time when the Burritos released their version. It's May 1970, on their second album, they released their version of Wild Horses. Beautifully done. Because of this, there was all the speculation about, did Graham write this? Mick and Keith, even though it would say Jagger Richards. The Burritos version, of course, a bit deeper country vibe, but you gotta love that pedal steel that they did. And the second album, Burrito Deluxe, was never finished fully the way they wanted it, as Graham was on his way out also. Chris Hillman of the Burritos didn't like Wild Horses. Here you see there's a very raw, unofficial bootleg song from Ultra Rare Tracks Volume 2 from 1989. It's said to be Keith and Graham, but looking at this description of the song, we know more of Graham being in San Francisco at this time frame, not at Muscle Shoals, and not noodling around with Keith. Thoughts it could be something done at Nelcott later. Putting this one out here also, Mick's brother, Chris Jagger. He would say Graham wrote it. This was in February 2013 in Uncut magazine. Chris was supposed to work on a project with the Flying Burrito Brothers, but it never completed. Now there is thought Graham wrote this and gave it to Keith. As I think of the story of Graham and his relationship with his sister, Little Avis. And here's another twist. Graham had a heavy responsibility to take care of his sister after deaths of his parents. Their dad passed in 1958 of suicide. Graham was 12 and his sister Little Avis 7-ish. The parents were alcoholics and they had heavy depression. And Graham's real name was Ingram Cecil Connor III. His mom would remarry after the dad committed suicide to a man named Parsons, who adopted him and sister Avis. Now, Graham's mom's family, they were extremely wealthy in the citrus fruit business. Now, Mom Avis died at 41 in 1965 of cirrhosis of the liver, and after that, Graham attended Harvard for a year. But he was a trust fund kid, so money was never an issue, which is why I tell this story. Graham went out and formed the International Submarine Band in '66 in Boston. He'd go on to the Byrds. In '69 to '70, he came in with the Burritos. But in between, Graham and Keith, they're tied at the hip since 1968. Now, something that's pretty cool, Graham was pioneering a style called Cosmic American music, which fuses together country, rock, and soul and gospel. And Graham started this with the Byrds, with Sweetheart of the Rodeo, and carried it on. And that genre exploded. Now, with Graham hanging out with Keith and feeling guilty of not taking care of Little Avis, and both having a tragic life that followed both of them. So if you look at the Wild Horses lyrics and the thoughts that Graham wrote this, it's kind of a big brother cradling little sister. And it was pretty amazing that it was written in his journal. Graham didn't really need the credit or cash or ego to take this tune and the credit for it. It's very possible they both were too screwed up in deciding who really wrote it. Or the Stones and Graham, both sides, agreed to a quiet agreement. So with all these pieces and moving parts for Wild Horses, we still don't know 100%. And we do know Graham had recommended artists to play on the prior album, Let It Bleed. It would be great to know the real bottom line. Even with all the statements provided by Mick and Keith on who, what, and where, and I don't think this one should be declared 100% by anyone, but a collaboration. There's just way too much ambiguity due to the multiple inspirations and involvements declared. Then again, I don't lose sleep over this. I just play the song over and over. Some things are just best to leave it alone. Oh, and one Keith note. In his interview with Howard Stern in 2023, Keith says it was inspired for leaving his son for the tour. He started on a 12-string acoustic, feeling guilty, and in life says it's about the missing of his home. 1993, both of them say, it's not wanting to be on the road, away from loved ones, which seems to be a pattern for the album. Now going to the deconstruction, the isolation of all the parts, breaking down the sounds, starting off with Charlie. He's not needing to exert himself. We then get guitars. We're completely knocked out with his style. No one has heard this yet. The song in G with A and B minor chords. The song can bring a tear to my eye as I hear this musical poetry. There's a fellow on YouTube, John McLennan, who I enjoy watching his videos. And he shows that Keith has a 12-string trick. He believes that the low E is dropped to a D. The string is not removed, that low E. The strings are tuned to an open E. And a capo is put on the bottom strings. That's called a partial capo at the 3rd fret. We hear Keith's part with the 12 strings, sweet and flowing chords, and just underrated. The lead's done tasteful, and it presents its own story. Keith is also playing the electric guitar on this. And then we have Mick.
Graceless lady, you know who I am. You know I can't let you slide through my hands.
And Keith and Mick.
Wild horses couldn't drag me away. Wild horses couldn't drag me away.
I'm not so familiar with all the versions that are out there. There's so many, and which take is which. In this version, at the end, we get to hear someone saying, "Let's hear it." So we did hear Graham say it was Mick that gave him the master tapes for Wild Horses. Many others will say Keith did. Could it be one or the other, or both? Keith being much closer to Graham, though, but I doubt Graham would really forget who gave them one of the Burritos' greatest songs.
You'll ride them someday. Wild horses couldn't drag me away. Wild horses will ride them someday.
I'm not sure what track it was, but Keith would drive to Stargroves from his Redlands home in southern England to record some overdubs. Now, Keith would show up so late that everyone was gone already. As a track would roll on one song, Keith would wait for his overdub entry point and end up nodding off. And then he wakes up when it was finished. I'm taking information from Chris Jagger's book. It was engineer Jeremy Gee that experienced this with Keith. After Keith wakes up at the song's end, Keith would tell Jeremy to roll the track back, then repeat the process all the way until 4 a.m. Then Keith drives back to Redlands on his own, and Jeremy would go to bed. This is how it would go down. Jeremy would assist Chris later on in his debut album in 1973 with the Stones' mobile truck and at Stargroves. Chris would be caretaker of Stargroves and host the bands to record there.
And Alexis Corner. It all sounded great to me as they ran through the many tunes I was familiar with from records and tape. The low spark of the high-heeled boys. Mick was relaxed about it all, so I took it all in my stride too, though of course it was quite a new experience for me. After the gig, we dropped off at a dilapidated terraced house in Chelsea. Edith Grove, then an unfashionable part of town where Mick rented a room. Brian and Keith lived there too, lads loose in the big city having a whale of a time, always broken on the scrounge from visiting girlfriends or whoever walked through the door. But
now I'm going to share this one story, Chris Jagger, about Zeppelin. They adored the home. Chris mentions one-time jamming with Robert Plant. Robert playing the drums, and Chris picks up Jimmy Page's sweet cherry red Gibson that was in open tuning, and he's playing it loud in the hall. Jimmy opens up the door and walks in, and he sees this. Jimmy didn't say anything, and Chris Jagger says probably because he was just jamming with Robert. After that, Jimmy did move all his gear to a separate room. This was during the Houses of the Holy sessions. Now after that, Zeppelin wanted to save some money, so they found Headley Grange, but rented the mobile truck. Apparently Headley Grange had no heat, but they saved money. In my Sticky Fingers Part 2 documentary regarding the plane flying over while they were recording at Star Groves, I stand corrected. It was during the Houses of the Holy, and it was Eddie Kramer as the engineer. Robert Plant was saying, "No, leave it." Mick and Keith are sending telexes to Alan Klein's New York City offices demanding the money. They have not received anything since January and should be getting £8,000. These telexes would be continuing on to Klein, asking for their money, as they didn't hear any word as of May. So they sent another telex, telling Klein they're on to him with his delay tactics, and see this is a hostile sign. An agreement now, or he should be expecting proceedings to start. And later in May, another telex. To save all of us time and money, they say, please give us our copyrights back by August 1st, 70. As promised, send us these documents by June 15th. Mick and Keith's back taxes, well, they were £57,000 each. They also found out that Brian would have debts of £191,000 and assets were $33,000 when he passed. And in the UK, May 20th, some of the Stones attend the opening of the Let It Be Beatles movie. Chris Kimsey was an assistant engineer for Glyn Johns at Olympic only, working mostly on Sticky's Olympic vocals. Chris had mentioned how for some reason Glyn could not do the vocals, so a nervous Chris took it over, but he would settle down quickly and do the job right. I mentioned Chris in more detail in my Beggars documentary, as he started in '67 as a tape operator, audio connector, ran the tape machines and logged, and he kept track of overdubs. It was here when he graduated. Now, the equipment used at Olympic for Keith was similar to what he used on tour in '69 and Muscle Shoals. Dan Armstrong Plexi, Les Paul, Custom Black Beauty, the Les Paul Black Custom with the moon painting, 59 Les Paul with Bigsby, Firebird 7 Flying V, National Steel Guitar, the Martin D1220 12-string, Harmony 1270 12-string, Gibson Hummingbird, Gibson J200. They used Fender Twin Reverbs or Ampeg VT22. Taylor used the Gibson SG, 59 Gibson Les Paul, white Fender Telly, a Gibson ES355 TDSV. He would use an effects pedal for echo, slight, fast echo, a Watkins WEM Copycat Echoplex. This was used in Can't You Hear Me Knockin' and a few others. Bill, the custom Daleks tuxedo bass, and a few Fender competition Mustangs. He used Hiwatt and Ampeg amps. Charlie the Black Swirl Gretsch. Now, by the March time frame of 70, Mary Ann was in a drug spiral with heroin. She was on a negative vibe ride, and Amit was right. Depressed and unstable, low with self-esteem, and pouring it on Mick. Mick would escape to Marcia Hunt's place in St. John's Wood. Mary Ann would be homeless, going in and out of friends' homes. She was out of the music scene, lost custody of her child, and a mess. Andrew Oldham's Immediate Records ended, finalized. They go bankrupt, financial issues, 5 years in the business. And in April, the Flying Burrito Brothers released Burrito Deluxe album with Wild Horses. On April 10th, Paul McCartney makes the public announcement he's leaving the Beatles. What was going on in the world while the Stones were recording and touring in 1970? As you can see in their global lists, destruction, war, killing, and just some unrest. Now for some positive events that are listed here. Now, with the release of Sticky Fingers in 1971, which we'll get to, from my perspective, 71 is one of the best years in rock and roll music. And not just for the obvious albums. It has some spectacular music. As you see here, from these albums, the amount of creativity and dedication of music that was being presented to the world is just simply amazing. There are so many great albums, I cannot show them all. If you see some you don't know, I advise you to go search on YouTube for them and give them a listen. Song number 4, Side 2, Dead Flowers. It actually started at Olympic on December 15th and carried on into April at Olympic. Funny fact, with Alan Klein owning Dead Flowers rights, the story goes, as written in Rolling Stone in 2008 article, for the movie The Big Lebowski's 10th anniversary, Alan Klein had asked for $150,000 from music producer of the film, T-Bone Burnett. That was because T-Bone was using Townes Van Zant's version in the movie. And T-Bone would plead with Klein to please come down with that amount. He then told Klein to come and watch an early version of the film.
Could you change the channel?
Fuck you, man. If you don't like my fucking music, get your own fucking cab.
I had a really
I'll
rough...
pull up to the side and kick your ass out.
Man, come on. I had a rough night, and I hate the fucking Eagles, man.
Out of my fucking cab. Out of my fucking cab.
So while Klein was watching, Klein stood up and said to T-Bone, "That is it. You can have this song. That was beautiful." It was right after seeing this scene, Klein loved hearing this line from the dude, that he hated the Eagles. Now, Glenn Frey from the Eagles would meet up one day with the dude, Jeff Bridges, and he laid into him. Jeff doesn't remember it at all, but it made him real uncomfortable. Then we would get many people thinking and not knowing that the Stones wrote Dead Flowers, and they would think Townes Van Zandt recorded it. He did it live in 1994. No studio cut. It was his version that Klein originally had the issue with in the last scene. Mick on vocals and acoustic guitar, showing here playing at the Paradiso in Amsterdam in 1995. A simple DAG chord progression. Lyrics change from Rose Pink Cadillac to Long Pink Cadillac.
In your long pink Cadillac, making bets on Kentucky Derby Day. My basement ring with a needle and a spoon, and another girl to take my pains away. Take me down, little Susie, won't you take me down?
It's known there's a song that sounds just a slight similar, very slight, but the song title has some similarity. Did they know of this? I would say probably, but who knows? It was from Blind Willie McTell's 1933, the song called Lay Some Flowers on My Grave. Nothing related lyrically except for the flowers on my grave reference.
You must lay some flowers on my grave.
Where's Mick coming from lyrically on this? I would say it is the end of a relationship and the protagonist moves on and predicts the post-happenings of a bitter and condescending lady who believes she has the know-it-all, the attitude and arrogance, and doing extremely well for herself. The protagonist stays in his own drug-infiltrated lifestyle and bitter towards Susie, or is it Lucy? And the needle in the spoon line, maybe it's just from Keith and his observation of him. The beauty here is how Mick just creates only 2 verses into this spectacular visionary story with a final conclusion. And then it seems like at the bottom line is how the protagonist knows he'll have the last word for a failed relationship. He will outlast her and have the decency to still be putting roses on her grave. Mick gives a little comment after playing it.
I felt like a hillbilly for a minute there. Just a minute, though.
So guess what? Gotta bring back from rumors that Dead Flowers can be tied to Gram Parsons. In the book Hickory Wind, written by Ben Fong Torres, a music journalist, he talks about Gretchen in Florida. She was writing to Gram while he was there in England with the Stones. Gretchen was the only one caring for Gram in the family. She was also sending him care packages. She was worried about him and his state of mind and his health. It's more of a myth that came about that Gretchen was sending Gram flowers, which would die by the time they got there in the mail. A myth post Sticky Fingers release.
Well, when you're sitting there in your silk-upholstered chairs, talking to some rich folks that you know, well, I hope you won't see me Susie, take me down. I know you think you're the queen of the underground. You can send me dead flowers every morning. Send me dead flowers by the mail. Send me dead flowers to my wedding. And I won't forget to put roses on your grave. All right, play on one more.
I'm going to jump to March 71, where a radio DJ, Tom Big Daddy Donahue of KSAN, San Francisco, was hired out by the Rolling Stones label for publicity, promo, to interview of Mick, and we also get to hear Charlie. This was put on an LP, probably for other stations to use.
Certain kinds of folk music I personally like.
Well, in the new LP, I think you get into areas that are relatively new to the Stones. Things that you've touched on before, but expand now. The country things.
There's one country song. We usually do one country song. I suppose this country song is a bit sort of exactly a country song. More than the
I
others.
think more than the others have been.
It's pretty straight country music.
I think you sound like you come from Georgia on it, and you got that now. And there's that
good cheap imitation, is that what you say? Or good expensive imitation.
It better be expensive.
Carry on.
Well, when you're sitting there in your silk upholstered chairs, talking to some rich folk that you know, well, I hope you won't see me in my ragged company, where you know I could never be alone. Take me down, little Susie, take me down. I know you think you're the queen of the underground, and you can send me dead flowers every morning. Send me dead flowers by the mail. Send me dead flowers to my wedding, and I won't forget to put roses on your grave.
There's a song called Dancing in the Light, which you have heard as Don Was a champion in taking on the song that was released in 2009 for the Exile re-release. In this version, Mick is singing with new added lyrics though. Now lyrically, not much of a Stone-skilled lyrics.
I'm running in the rain, you're dancing in the light. I'm waiting for the train, the devil will arrive. You left me twisted in the wind.
What I'd rather focus on is the version they made in April 70. It has Stu playing piano, which you might think could be Nicky, Jimmy Miller adding percussion, a full-sounding jam where you can hear how they develop. You can hear Mick hollering. There is just a real slight sound of Loving Cup in here for me. The build-up at the end is divine. When I first heard this, it was the bass line that first stood out. In Martin Elliott's book, he mentions that Don Was wanted to add some new bass to it, but he could just not follow Bill's unique playing pattern and the style. Another tune called As Now. The song's pretty much unverified, and I cannot find much on this tune, but it's in the log. Also a song called Rocket, so I cannot give anything more than just that.
When I'm alone, some schoolboy.
In an interview with Nina Antonia, it is mentioned and known that they needed that one more song promised to Decca. In the studio, Jimmy Miller mentions how at the end of a mixing session for tapes that they were giving Alan Klein, Mick would say he has a song for them, a masterpiece. He would ask Jimmy if he could fix up a mic. I'm going to try an acoustic song. So they mic it all up for Mick. Mick lays down Cocksucker Blues, also known as Schoolboy's Blues. There may be more than one take, I'm not 100%. I explained this plenty in the other documentary. Mick would say if Decca released it, then the Stones would promote it on Top of the Pops. Jiving Sister Fanny was worked on first in '69, one of Taylor's first contributions. It is to be known that some more guitar overdubs were worked on and thoughts of vocals. So it was not a song that would fit in Let It Bleed, but yes to Sticky. I couldn't find the version for 1970. There is one version I like and want to share it just a bit. It's from Izzy Stradlin from his 92 tour. Not sure where, the UK, Japan, Australia. Izzy has his ties with the Stones and such a fantastic artist. His solo work with Juju Hounds is recommended. Rick Richards, a guitarist with Georgia Satellites, is playing with him along with Duff McKagan. It's damn cool rock and roll.
She called down the station, said she didn't like where we played.
Now for the original version of Jivin' Sister Fanny, there's an artist that is on congas. His name is John Tiven. John was born in '55 in New Haven, Connecticut. Some list him playing guitar on the song. It's still possible. He was a journalist for Rolling Stone and Melody Maker, a talented musician and producer. His tie is in knowing Nicky, working together prior, and also Jimmy Miller. Tiven would work later on with Mick Taylor, Bobby Keys, and Nicky. And Tiven would play with the Jim Carroll Band as a guitarist and organist. So look him up. So he is somewhere in there with Jivin' Sister Fanny. May 4th, the 6th, and the 7th at Olympic, Glyn Johns would work with producer Norman Dayron, on a very special session. Norman was with Chess Records and had an idea. He wanted to bring together British blues and rock musicians with the great Howlin' Wolf. Norman had interest of getting some of the old-timers revitalized by mixing them with younger musicians who were influenced by them. This was the first done on the collaboration album in 1969, Father and Sons. Great title and also lineup. It was recorded at Chess Studios in Chicago. This one started thanks to Bloomfield and Paul Butterfield wanted to have a charity concert with Muddy Waters. Now, Norman was at the Fillmore West at an Electric Flag concert. Don't know who they are? Look them up. Mike Bloomfield was backstage with Clapton and introduced the two. Norman asked Eric if he had any desire to make an album and play with Howlin' Wolf. Clapton salivated, but just one caveat. Nobody's asked Wolf yet. Wolf thought it was a horrible idea, and when told about it who would be there, he was not even sure who the hell they all were. Also, he was kind of ill. He had some heart arrhythmia issues and not so keen on traveling at that time. Wolf knew Norman and trusted him, though, and his idea eventually. The doctor says it was better for him to go do this session than go on his own down to Mississippi and do some gigs. So when Eric heard Hubert Sumlin was being left behind, Hubert was Wolf's guitarist, Eric would say, "No, Hubert," and he won't show. They organized a session to Eric's schedule. Norman started at Chess as a janitor, then engineer, then producer at Chess in the 60s. He knew the Chess sound. Glenn threw him out of the control room the first day. As the band was doing their sessions and playing the cover songs, Norman would not agree with the sound and play the songs on a turntable and sometimes at the wrong speed, not even realizing it. So Glenn could not take it anymore and he just said, "Get out of here." Eric organized his team and wanted Charlie, Bill, and Ian. First day, Charlie couldn't make it, and Bill didn't want to play without Charlie. So the team had to pull a quick audible, and they called up Klaus Vormann, Ringo to join in. Now Norman wanted Clapton to take all these leads on the guitar, but Clapton knew, and he bowed down to Hubert. And in the studio, he would give Hubert the nod to go play the leads. When all were in the studio music room, they would look to Wolf for the lead role. But Wolf would say, "That man Norman in the control room, he's the producer. Look to him. He knows what he wants." But Wolf and others, at first, were somewhat out of sync. No real connection, and Wolf was uncomfortable. Klaus Vormann would say how when Wolf took the mic off the stand while singing, he would walk up to the musicians, bend down real close, looking everyone in the face, and sang his ass off. Such power and magic. Clapton said for the first days he was scared of Wolf, as he was not saying anything to anyone. Enough that he asked Norman if he should really return back for the other days. Ian did play piano, but when Norman got back to Chicago, he asked Steve Winwood to do some piano overdubs. Now Wolf was drinking heavy and he wasn't taking his meds. The breakthrough connection was when Eric asked Wolf to show him how to play Little Red Rooster and see the changes. So Wolf grabbed an F-Hall beat-up old acoustic guitar and he showed and taught Eric his way. Wolf said, "Somebody's got to do it when I'm gone." Everyone just froze. But this broke the ice. Eric knew the song well already, but Wolf was grabbing Eric's wrist, sliding it up and down on the neck, and you say you play it here, then you play it there.
would take it.
Right.
Now you play it that way.
You sure you wouldn't like? Why don't you play acoustic on it with us, man?
I
If you
can't
play,
sing.
see, if you played with us, Wolf, then we'd be able to follow you better.
No,
So like you were doing it right then, man.
You're there.
That's how we should record it.
See,
you
I
know? I can
can't-
follow you. I can see what you're doing.
Really, man, you just sit there and do it.
Well, let's,
so cool.
all right, let everybody get together there. We'll try to make it.
Okay, let's try. But I doubt if I can do it without you.
Oh, man, come on. He ain't got nothing to do with counting off and change on, and you know, when you say 1, 2.
Now, there were times when Keith was in the control room, while Wolf was in there also, and Keith would just listen to Wolf tell stories. Mick was there also, and Norman wanted Mick to be involved, so he gave him some percussion and maracas, tambourines, and even a triangle. Now, this album was released August 71. Most of you have seen this. In the US and Canada under Chess Records and Rolling Stones Records in the UK.
Awesome, actually. It was kind of like meeting an elephant. He was just so big and overwhelming. And then the other thing is that you realize you just met like one of the most gentle and knowledgeable elephants that you're likely to meet. I mean, the first time I met him, 1965, where we insisted that they put him on this TV show called Shindig, and sticks out his hand and says, "Love the stuff you've been doing with my stuff," you know, and you're going, pass the test, you know. That's that. And then he became a very good friend, especially to Bill Wyman.
Looking at this show list, can you tell what song I'm going to do next? Actually, the bottom yellow Marquee Club should give it away. I have a bias for the Stones' slower tunes, as it gives me plenty of depth and room to hear the playing clearly and crisp and those vocals. This is one of them, and one of the real lucky times we get to hear them play this live at the Marquee. The way Mick sings this, I could feel him in this soulful song. I'm just so locked in. Somewhere they say Mick does not like this song, and you could see it in his performance in the Marquee when he introduced this. Just because he wasn't jumping around, I don't think he hated this song. And Bobby playing the sax solo instead of the organ. Standard tuning, played in G. All five are in with this tune. I Got the Blues. Keith on backing vocals. Bobby Keys and Jim Price step in with those fabulous horns, a first step of bringing that horn section and bringing that soul. It's written in Bobby Keys' book how much Mick was really getting influenced by Otis Redding and Wilson Pickett, and Bobby trying to influence him more and get into it. Now I'm going to play a 1965 Otis song, and we could hear some real influence from this song. Steve Cropper playing the guitar. I can only play a short piece, but you can look it up and give it a listen. I've been loving you too long.
I've been loving you
alone.
Some folks have a hard time with the copying. I don't. I don't care if he's imitating Otis at all. Here in 1999 in San Jose, Mick banters about it and mentions Otis.
Thank you very much. We're going to slow it down a little bit before we're going to chill out a little bit and do a song for you. This is like a soul ballad that we do. It's a bit like in Otis Redding style. It's called I Got the Blues.
Stones wanted a gospel feel for the song. They got it. Through networking, and I believe Jimmy Miller, they plucked Billy Preston for the session. They want him to play the Hammond organ. There's not much needed to say how much he injects the feeling into this song and how powerful it is. I have to go with what many say already, that Mick is placing those Marianne feelings into this. Perfect timing around them going in separate ways. Very obvious words and pretty romantic. But we need to remember, this is a song about Mick feeling blue. And it's not a blues progression. Unfortunately, I don't have the isolated, deconstructed pieces for this song. One I really wish I did.
Now we're going to do this sort of soul tune for you, very, very slow one. We're going to try and play as slow as we possibly can, because that's the way it's supposed to be.
Just a bit from Jeremy Barras playing. Sharing now a soulful version, Solomon Burke. He made this one. It's on an album, Make Do With What You Got, in 2005, produced by Don Was. Now Solomon played with the Stones in 2002, the Licks Tour, at the Wiltern Theater in LA, and sang as a guest on Everybody Needs Somebody to Love. So 3 years later, he belted out I Got the Blues on his own. Very cool. And it looks like Solomon had a planning of caping Mick, but Mick sort of got embarrassed, as you could see. Then comes the serious kick-ass at the Fonda Theater in 2015. When you think of Mick performing this and thinking it was for Marianne, it kind of makes you appreciate more and shed a tear that he's thinking of her.
Sing a song for you.
I keep on saying this, and I'll continue, as many do also realize what makes the Stones stand out as being on the top. Look at all their songs. They stand alone, unique, represent something special. Their product represents the changing, constant changing of their environment and music talents. Every song has its own chapter in the Stones book. There might be some sister songs related, tied together, but the Stones have the formula. The formula to be masters at originality. Like their album Prior, every song is pure brilliance. As Keith would say about Sticky Fingers, there were changes in the air. It was a new era, and we had to make our mark. Which leads me to the next song, which stands on its own pedestal, like the others, and it proves their pedigree.